Good afternoon, everyone. I am responsible for the Inquiring Minds monthly series that comes to you under the auspices of Toronto Mensa. And I warmly welcome you to this Zoom edition of Toronto Mensa Inquiring Minds. My name is Kathleen Smith. It is my pleasure to introduce today's speaker. Do you love spy stories? Do you love spy stories about real spies whose secrets have finally been revealed after many years? If so, you are in the right place. You're going to hear a war story that is not about the violence and the carnage, but instead is about elaborate strategies, problem solving, overcoming obstacles such as resistance from those higher up in the chain of command, generally thinking outside the box, and many other aspects that hold fascination for those who love the creative side of, for example, multi-layered games. I know there's quite a few of you who love games. Today's speaker, Robert Hutton, has been enjoying a distinguished career in the United Kingdom as a journalist for such newspapers as the Financial Times of London. He spent 16 years providing political coverage of 5 different prime ministers in England for Bloomberg television broadcasts. Currently, Rob Hutton is writing a column for a British magazine called The Critic, where he continues his political coverage of those in power. Meanwhile, he has published 2 books on the history of intelligence gathering. One title is Agent Jack, the true story of MI5's secret Nazi hunter. And the other is The Illusionist, the true story of the man who fooled Hitler. For today's presentation, Robert Hutton will regale us with an account of Magic at War, the true story of the illusionist who fooled Hitler. Welcome, Rob.
Hi there. Hi there. Right. Sorry, I've completely lost my screen now. That's very elegant. Hi there. Right. Well, actually, I think the first question I'd like to ask people is, who here has heard of Dudley Clark? I think there's a way you can put your hands up in some magical way in this system. Though now
I'll tell you if anybody raises their hand.
Yes. Has anybody heard of Dudley Clark? No, well, there's no particular reason that people should have. Well, let me tell you why he's so interesting. I'm just going to share my screen. Just bear with me.
My guess is that nobody's heard of him because he was a spy and he wanted to stay.
Well, we may well come on to what he wanted and the extent to which he succeeded in it, I think. So, I'm going to take you to Cairo in 1942, which is a city of license, actually. It's a city in a country that is at war, but the war is all happening out in the desert, and Cairo itself is quite a jolly place. Indeed, if you're a British soldier or Canadian, there are soldiers from all over are popping up. So certainly Canada, also Australia, New Zealand, India, all the bits of the world that Britain owned in 1940. And all of these soldiers are being sent to Cairo, where they discover that actually it's kind of a party city. There is much less rationing. than there is in certainly back in London. Back in London, you've got the blackout and things are a bit grim. In Cairo, you can go and watch belly dancing. You can go and have cocktails on the veranda. It's very much probably one of the last places in the world where the sons of empire could enjoy the empire as it was, sort of as I say, what would be nicer than sitting in the veranda of the Continental, sipping a martini as the sun goes down. Um, and that's generally the situation in Cairo. And certainly once you've finished with your belly dancing and your dinner, you pretty much everything is for sale. Um, Catering to any taste and tastes that people didn't even know they had before they got there. And um, in July 1942, though, it's not like that. July the 1st, 1942, this is not a city of license. It's a city that's panicking. There are queues outside the banks. Inside the banks, there are people shouting at tellers trying to get their money out. There are queues outside the railway station, and inside the railway station, there are people trying to shove their families onto trains that are leaving. Um, in the British Embassy, where pretty much the city and the war are being run from, there are queues of British officials, men and women, making their way out of the building to huge bonfires of paper that they have set up in the gardens of the embassy, where they are trying to burn all of their top secret documents. It's not an entirely successful operation. I don't know if anyone here has ever burned uh, paper, especially thin paper, on a bonfire. But of course, what happens is that it all starts to fly up and float away, and the paper is being carried by the hot air. It's being carried up and over the walls of the embassy, and then landing down in the city. And for weeks afterwards, British soldiers will find themselves, when they go to buy peanuts, that the peanuts are wrapped up in top secret documents that His Majesty's government had hoped to destroy. And the reason for all of this panic is, well, for 2 years at this point, the war has been going backwards and forwards. Now, I think that I can annotate on this, which may turn out to be a disaster, but let's give it a try. Um, uh, the war has been running backwards and forwards between the border between Egypt and Libya, which is just there, and at the end of 1940, the Italian army, which is in Libya, had advanced to this border and then just sort of advances across it a little way and then stops because it doesn't quite know what to do. And at the end of 1940, the British Army pushes it all the way back across the Cyrenaica Desert to about here. And then the Germans get involved and they push the British all the way back. And then at the end of 1941, the British push the Germans all the way to here. And this may be starting to look familiar. And the one of the books, one of the very good books about the Desert War is called The Pendulum of War, because everything was just swinging backwards and forwards. And why this is happening is that it's a problem of supply. If you think about the desert, you can't get anything there. There's nothing to eat, there's nothing to drink, and there's nothing to make your tank or your truck go. And the further you go across the desert, bringing your supplies up behind you, everything has to come up behind you. And the further you go, the more supply the supply trucks need, if that makes sense. So you reach what military theorists call your sort of your culmination point, which is basically you can't get any further than this because all of the supplies that the supply trucks are bringing up are being used by the supply trucks to get to you. Um, and uh, and so, but in early 1942, the Germans push back, and this time they push all the way over the border and they get to here, which is, as you can see, really quite close to Cairo. Cairo is just there. Um, and this is down to one remarkable general. Can I just have to stop annotating for a moment. No. This man, Rommel. Oh, now I've got my annotations stuck on him. Let's see if I can delete that. um, clear all drawings. There we are. This General Rommel, who has attained a sort of mythic status, both among his own men and among the British men. The British commanders say in memos they're worried that their own soldiers see him as a Superman. He's incredible. He seems to be incredibly well informed. In fact, if you read my book, you'll discover that at points during this advance, he knows more about Allied dispositions than the Allies know about their own dispositions, and there are very particular reasons for that. Um, so he has pushed forward, and one German soldier has even got as far as Alexandria, which is just north of Cairo on the coast. He zooms ahead. He's so excited by the advance. He zooms ahead on his motorbike to Alexandria, where he's promptly taken prisoner. But the Royal Navy at Alexandria is sufficiently worried about this that they have weighed anchor with the fleet has weighed anchor and fled. In Cairo, there is a general evacuation going on. As I say, at headquarters, they're burning all the documents. The Polo Club in the middle of Cairo has, to its horror, seen its polo fields have been dug up so that anti-tank gun emplacements can be put in, ready to fight the Germans as they advance through the city. So they're taking this extremely seriously. The Italian leader Mussolini has had both his barber and a special big white horse flown in so that he can have a nice haircut and ride the horse through Cairo on his victory parade. So the Axis forces expect to advance. The Allies are in a total panic. Everyone is panicking except for one man. And this man, Dudley Clark. Now, everyone else is trying to get out of the city. Dudley Clark is getting ready to stay. And he is preparing to wage guerrilla warfare behind the German lines. And he's assembled a gang of his friends, and he's got his men going out in the city. They're stealing number plates, they're stealing uniforms, they're stealing anything that they might be able to use to disguise themselves and their operations. And the idea is that after the Germans have occupied Egypt and the Nile Delta, Clark and his men will be hiding out. They will be working both with the local police and local criminal gangs. Clark is conducting negotiations with both of them. They will be helping British soldiers who got left behind to get out of Egypt and get back to their units. And they will be trying generally to just make life hell for the Germans. And if everyone else is dreading this, Dudley Clark is looking forward to it. Dudley Clark is having the time of his life because there are some people who only really become themselves in wartime when the normal rules of civilization are suspended and they're just allowed to do what they want. And Dudley Clark is one of those men. And what he most of all likes is having fun. Now, to no one's disappointment as much as Clark's, or possibly Rommel's, the Germans don't make it into Cairo, and they're held at a just south of a railway station called El Alamein, now quite famous. And 3.5 months later, the Allies have a new general, this chap, Bernard Montgomery. Rommel has failed to break through, and now he knows what's coming next, which is that after you fail to break through, the other guy has a crack at breaking through your line and pushing back. So he knows, and he knows there's a new general, and he knows that this general will be trying to make an attack. Now, the good news for Rommel is that this attack can only come on really sort of quite a short line. It's only sort of 50 or 60 miles, the Allied line. And you can't go round to the north because the Mediterranean Sea is there. Can't drive tanks through the sea. And you can't go around to the south because of what's called the Qattara Depression, which is I think it's a sort of a salt marsh. If anyone's seen the film Ice Cold in Alex, which if you haven't seen it and you get the chance, I would strongly recommend. Um, that is a British World War II film about a journey across the Qattara Depression, and the short answer is you can just about drive one truck across the Qattara Depression with difficulty. There's no way you're getting an army across it. Um, so your attack has to come somewhere along this line, and Rommel's intelligence chief, a chap called Hans Otto Behrendt, it's his job to work out two things. Where will the attack come? And when will the attack come? And broadly, it will either be in the south or it will be in the north. And the big advantage that Behrendt has got is that he knows he can't be taken by surprise because it's a desert. So there's no cover. There are no trees to hide underneath. There are no buildings to conceal you. There's just, rocks. It's flat. Um, it's as flat. One of the generals said as a billiard table, and so there's no chance of hiding anything. And so Behrendt is sitting there, and he is looking for clues. And here are some of the clues that he can see. He can see that in the south there are some tanks and some guns, and there is evidence of an Allied build-up. Way back behind the line, sort of a day's drive from the line, he can see lots and lots of tanks and trucks and guns. And look, that's obviously going to be the attacking force. So the question is, does it go south or does it go north? Well, here's another clue. The other thing he can see very slowly being built is the Allies are building a water pipeline. Now, they're taking their time about it, and it hasn't yet got to the front, but it's very clearly running south. One of the things that the army will need is water. There's no water out there. So that's a pretty big clue, right? Another thing he can see is a supply dump. It's very clear in the photographs, and again, that's in the south, right? So if you're going to be attacking, you're going to need food and water and bullets and ammunition and all manner of things, tobacco, lots of stuff, and all of that stuff has to be built up in big supply dumps, and all of those are in the south. And all he can really see in the north is lots and lots of soft-skinned Allied trucks that are just sitting around, and there are a lot of them, but they're not moving and they're not doing anything. And although they might be suggestive on their own, you're not going to drive through the German lines in a soft-skinned truck. So those are sort of interesting, but they're not that interesting. And the conclusion that Behrendt comes to two conclusions. The first is that pretty clearly the attack is going to be in the south, and the second is that the attack is not imminent, because the water pipeline hasn't got there. Most of the Allied forces are still well back in the line. He will be able to see them come forward. He's got planes going up every day to have a look. And as I say, there's no way of hiding it. So it's all a bit of a shock when at the 10 p.m. at the end of October one evening, the Allied guns start firing, and it is an Allied bombardment. Is a bombardment like certainly no one in North Africa has ever seen before. It may be at that point the largest in history. The guns just start firing and they just keep firing. And so intense is the bombardment that even on the Allied side, soldiers start to panic just because the noise is so huge. Men don't know how they're going to respond to this stuff until they've been in it. One of the journalists who covered this war later sort of captures it comes across a captured German notebook where an officer had tried to write down what was going on, and he said it's just gibberish. This man had just sort of, he got as far as I must sit down and write a note, but then he'd been unable to process what was happening to him. Just the huge weight of explosive that's falling on them. And so obviously the attack is happening. The one problem is that Rommel, the German commander, isn't even. He's not just that he's not in his headquarters. He's not even in Africa. He has been so confident that an attack isn't imminent that he has returned to Germany for rest and recuperation. He's in the Alps at the moment. Um, and it takes him a couple of days to get back. It takes them a couple of days to work out where the Allied thrust is. And the Allied thrust is somehow, the Allied thrust is in the north. And Berendt has an awful lot to do over the next few days, trying to understand what's going on, trying to interrogate prisoners and that kind of thing. But there's one question that he's really struggling with all the time, which is how did the Allies manage to move an entire army up to the northern end of the line without him seeing it? Now, the answer to that question is Dudley Clark, and it's his team. And I don't know if you can read this. Um, it's officially forbidden to, it's an offense to show you this, but I might show it to you anyway. This is Dudley Clark's team. Here they are in Cairo in 1945. Now, they were called A Force, which was a mysterious name for a mysterious outfit. Clark is in the middle in the front there, if you can just see him. Who was Dudley Clark? If people have heard of him at all these days, it's likely to be because of he's in the BBC series SAS Rogue Heroes, played by Dominic West here. The other reason that some people have heard of Dudley Clark is because of his arrest in 1941, which became famous because of how he was dressed when he was arrested. Um, this is how I first came across him when this photo was released in about 2012, and at the time we all thought this was a sort of we couldn't work out what was going on, but this man was obviously not serious. He was obviously a little bit mad, and this remains a mysterious incident. And what I didn't appreciate at the time, but I do now, is that when Clark is arrested in Madrid, in the words of the British Embassy, dressed down to the brassiere as a woman, um, he is the person outside London with the greatest knowledge of British intelligence secrets. He's in fact on his way back from London, where he's just been sitting with the chiefs of the General Staff. He's been sitting with the Deputy Director of MI5. He's been inside MI5's most secret meeting, which is it's called the 20 Committee, where it discusses the fact that all of the German spies in Britain are double agents. So that's a reasonably large secret. I think he's probably not privy to the fact that the British, the Allies are breaking the German Enigma code at this point, but he would have been privy to the fact that the Allies had some really tremendous intelligence sources that the Germans didn't know about. And it's certainly not hard to imagine that someone interrogating him could have worked out that there was a leak that they weren't aware of. He knows, apart from anything else, about the detailed plans for an imminent British attack in Egypt, which is going to be one of the attacks that pushes the Germans all the way back across the line. So if anyone in German, if any Germans in Spain, and there were lots of German spies in Spain, if any German spies in Spain had grasped his importance, it would have been very worthwhile for them to get the Spanish to release him into their custody, bundle him into a car, drive him up to Berlin, and start pulling his fingernails out. He had an awful lot of stuff in his head, and you can tell how serious it is from the people at the meeting in London to discuss what to do about his arrest. Present is the Minister for War, fair enough, the Chief of the Imperial General Staff, the Foreign Secretary, the Permanent Secretary to the Foreign Office, and Winston Churchill. So these are the most important men in the war effort at that point, and they are sitting down to discuss what to do about Dudley Clark. Now, Clark is released, and we never quite find out what happened, although I have theories. Um, but this incident would have ended most careers. It very nearly ended Clark's, and the reason it didn't is because Clark had a lot of very senior fans. Here you can see two of his commanders, Claude Auchinleck and Archibald Wavell, and these are the successive commanders of Allied forces in the Middle East. They are among a series of generals who just think that Dudley Clark is amazing. Um, and they say, you know, quite happily that in their view he was one of the most creative and original thinkers of the war. So let's have another look at him, not in his dress. What could we talk about Clark? We could talk about how he founded the Commandos, how he helped to found the SAS, how he advised the Americans on how they could establish the Rangers. We could talk about his two trips to Norway in 1940, one of them carrying a briefcase full of cash. We could tell you about how he was sent on a top secret mission to Ireland in 1940 to discuss the circumstances in which the Irish, who have, remember, only just kicked the British army out, might ask the British army to come back to help them fight off a Nazi invasion. That is so sensitive. I don't think that the British have ever confirmed that that happened. I certainly don't. The Irish are quite shifty about it. Um, I could tell you about his adventures spying behind enemy lines in Lebanon and Syria, but amazingly, none of these are what he believed was his great work. So I'm going to tell you about that instead. At the end of 1940, Clark, who has been in London having this amazing series of adventures, is ordered to leave the command of the commandos and go to Cairo because he has been requested by Archibald Wavell. Now, Wavell is at this point the only British general who is actually fighting the enemy. And that is because every time the British army at this point has met the German army, the British army has ended up retreating. So this happens in Norway, this happens in France and Belgium, and in fact it's about to start happening in North Africa. So Wavell has successfully managed to fight the Italians, but when Rommel arrives, he will find it's a rather more difficult business. But Wavell has an idea how he might change that situation, and he wants Clark for a special job. Because he is the only general fighting, what Wavell wants, Wavell gets. And he sends a cable to London saying, please could you release Dudley Clark to my service? And what he wants Clark to do is take charge of deception. Now, military deception is not a new idea. Um, you will be familiar with the Trojan horse. You might not be familiar with the story in the Bible of the Israelites attacking the city of Ai, where the Israelites fake a retreat, having left a small force outside the city hidden, small covert force outside the city. The main army retreats. They know that the soldiers of Ai will come out to pursue them. And when the soldiers of Ai come out to pursue them, the hidden covert force runs into the city and sets it on fire. And the smoke coming up from the city, the Bible says, was the signal for the Israelites to turn around and slaughter the soldiers of Ai. You might be familiar with the Chinese story of the General Pang Chuan, who was pursuing his old enemy, and his old enemy, who was a wily warrior, ordered that each night his army should set fewer fires so that it would look like not only the army was running away, but soldiers were deserting the army. And one night, sufficiently few fires have been set that Pang Chuan decides this is the moment for his final strike. So he sends his army in. He leads his army in to kill his enemy, and they get to a tree in the middle of what they think is the enemy camp, and they can see a sign hanging on the tree. Goes the story, and Pang Chuan orders a torch to be lit so that he can read the sign. And when he does, he reads that the sign says, Pang Chuan dies beneath this tree, because his wily opponent had set archers hidden in the woods, and they were under instructions to aim for the torch. Um, that that he knew that Pang Chuan would light. So there is a long tradition of military deception, but it's also very controversial. It's viewed, especially in sort of Christian medieval Europe, deception is viewed as being dishonorable. An honest soldier, declares himself and attacks his enemy. He says who he is. It's also, even if you sort of leave questions of honor aside, Clausewitz, the military theorist, says that deception is a waste because Clausewitz says, look, if you send an army, over to your northern flank to make it look like you might attack in the north, you've wasted that army. So Clausewitz says, really, deception should only be used by commanders who are weak and desperate. Now, Wavell is not exactly weak and desperate, but he's not exactly not weak and desperate either. Um, the course of the British War in 1941 is right. I'm gonna start drawing again, and we'll see how this works. Um, so first of all, the Allies retreat from Greece. The British and Australian, Canadian forces are all pushed out of Greece. Then they're pushed out of Crete. Over here in Libya, they're being pushed back across the desert. So Wavell too is doing a fair amount of retreating across the course of 1941, and he is worried about this, and he needs to look strong. And he sort of gives Clark this deception job, and Wavell's got thoughts about how to do it, but Clark is really just kind of figuring this out from first principles. And in the summer of 41, there's a key moment where Wavell says to Clark, look, the 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 Germans are taking Greece, the Germans are taking Crete. We're worried the next place they might take is Cyprus, this island here. Not stupid thing to think about. The thing is, there's only 4,000 British troops on Cyprus. Crete had a lot more than that, and that fell very quickly. We need to just slow the Germans down long enough to be able to get some defenses in place. Now, the defense of Cyprus is in the command of a chap called Brigadier Rodwell. Brigadier Rodwell is a brigadier. He commands a brigade that is about 4,000 men. And Clark wants to make it look like there are more troops there. And so he sends one of his men to. I'm just going to delete my annotations. He sends one of his men to speak to uh, Rodwell, and the instruction he gives him is there's sort of good news and bad news. The good news is that London is just about to announce that you're being promoted to Major General. The bad news is that it's not real. You're a fake Major General, and the reason that we're saying that we're promoting you is that we want the Germans to see that there's a Major General on Crete, because the Germans know that a brigadier commands a brigade, and a Major General commands a division, which is roughly 1,600 men. So suddenly our hope is that simply by giving you a bump in rank, we can make it look as though there are 4 times as many troops here. Now, if that sounds daft, it worked. The Germans see that there's a Major General there, and they go, "Oh, okay, well, the Major General commands a division." Right, and in fact, later the Allies capture a German intelligence map of Cyprus, where somebody has busily sort of tried to fill in where he thinks all of these troops might be. He says it's like watching a schoolboy sort of just trying to fake his homework. What I love about this example, aside from the fact that it's an incredibly cheap way of creating 1,200 men, 12,000 men rather, is it shows how uniquely well equipped Clark is for this job. Because he's a career soldier and because he's been an intelligence officer, he understands how soldiers and intelligence officers think. He sort of instinctively knows this is what, this is what I would think if I were in these shoes. Because he's been, in fact, a pilot, he knows the Middle East from both the ground and the air. Um, because he has fought against an insurgency in Palestine in the 1930s, he knows how insurgents fight. But those are sort of those, as it were, his military qualifications. He's also got slightly interesting non-military qualifications. The first is that in his peacetime soldiering, Clark was the person that the army tended to turn to when they needed to put on a show. So he has become an impresario, and he's put on a series of really quite large-scale productions. He's also the guy who writes the sort of the staff officers panto and this kind of thing. He he knows how to tell a story, and he knows how to put on a show, how to make something look like something. And most of all, Clark is the nephew of a chap called Sidney Clark, who no one has heard of these days, but was in his day the leading historian of magic and the founder of Britain's Magic Circle, which is our sort of leading magical society. And Uncle Sidney had taught nephew Dudley how to do stage magic. So Clark knows the tricks of the trade, the tricks of magic, and he knows storytelling and he knows about performances. And by October 1941, he's begun to realize that deception has possibilities in a world war that no one else has quite grasped. The way I like to talk about this is very often people engage in what's called tactical deception, where it's really it's what's happening at the battle ahead of the Battle of El Alamein. We make it look like we're coming in the south, but actually we're coming in the north. Now, it takes because Rommel is in the wrong country and so on, it takes the Nazis about 3 days to recover from this mistake. But you can recover from this mistake in 3 days. You can order your reserves to the right place. And 3 days is not nothing, by the way. 3 days is gets Monty the breakthrough that he needs. So not knocking it. But men who are in the wrong trench can be moved. An army that's in the wrong country is stuck. And Clark thinks, well, if we can get people to put their forces at the wrong end of the line, can we also get them to put them at the wrong end of Europe? And in October 1941, he goes to London and he says to them, what we need is a complete deception plan for winning the war. And what we need is both our real plan for winning the war, and we need to start telling what our bogus plan is. Um, this is an astonishing level of vision, and indeed it's so huge that really almost no one else in the war ever quite fully gets their head around it. Clark has grasped what is possible. And what's really interesting to me about this is that the generals in London say yes. Now, I'm sure many of you will have seen the sort of the classic war movie where something like the Dam Busters, and there's always a scene where somebody's got a whizzy idea that's going to turn everything around, and he goes to his boss, and his boss says, "No, I don't think we're going to be doing that." And then there's another scene where you have to go around the stuffy general, and you have to get to Churchill, and you get to Churchill, and Churchill is the man with the vision to say yes. In fact, that's not what happens. The generals, partly because they've been losing, the generals are open to every idea that anyone might have that might help them win. And and so they say yes to Clark immediately. Now he is still at this point working out what can be done. And one of the problems he's had is that if you say that the 10th Armored Division is on Cyprus, defending Cyprus, and then a German soldier finds himself fighting the 10th Armored Division in Libya. German intelligence are quite good at this. They're quite good at sort of who are we in contact with? What can we see? And they will say, well, the 10th Armored Division can't be on Cyprus. Cross out Cyprus. Put Libya. We can see them. We're fighting them. And they're struggling with this. And then sort of he suddenly just has a blinding moment of realization. He's walking through Cairo, in early 42, and he sees a truck go past with a new unit sign. Every British unit had its own sort of little picture logo. And he sees it go past and he thinks, I've not seen that one before. And then the next thought is, oh, well, new troops in town. And being Clark, whose mind is always whirring and thinking about plans, he thinks, well, why don't I use something like this with the enemy? And he goes back to his office and he says, I want you to start working up a plan to create completely false units. Because if, say, the 11th Armored Division, which only exists in A Force's files, if we say the 11th Armored Division is on Cyprus, who is to tell us that we're wrong? No one's ever going to meet them because they don't exist. And we will create these false units, and then we can do what we like with these false units. And what he also understands is that you're going to have to do this constantly. You can't let it drop. Once you've created the 11th Armored Division, you have to keep giving it things to do. You have to keep assigning people to it. You have to keep moving it around in places that are beyond the German line of sight. I mean, you're all sort of logical people. You'll know how much harder it is to prove a negative than it is to prove a positive. Very easy to prove if you can see the 10th Armored Division, it's very easy to see the 10th Armored Division is there. It's much harder to prove that the 11th Armored Division isn't somewhere back in Palestine where you can't see it. Because even if you go there, even if you send a spy there to have a look, well, it might just not be in the bit that he's looking at. And this becomes known as Operation Cascade. And in his words, it is the basis of everything. It's the most important intelligence operation of the war. And because it's all about paperwork, no one has heard of it. No one is ever going to make a film about Operation Cascade because compared to sort of floating corpses off Spain or, other whizzy fun things that the Allies did, sort of sitting there and making up lies and then passing these lies over it's not very sexy, but it is tremendously important. And the Allies completely embraced deception. Eisenhower orders that every real operational plan should be accompanied by a deception plan to go along with it. So again, this idea that this is all being done by tiny groups of people is simply not true. If you look at what's going on ahead of El Alamein, let's talk about how they pulled that deception off. First of all, the tanks that the enemy could see are tanks like this. The thing about this tank is that you can carry it. It's a dummy tank. The Allies have got lots and lots of dummy tanks. Look how beautiful this is. So look at the shading around the wheels under that. That will be a flat surface. But the Allies, because they've sort of mobilized this citizen army, they discover they've got artists, they've got filmmakers working for them, and they go around finding all of these people. And then if you go and look at the files of the camouflage unit, they build these replicas, they paint them, they photograph them from all sorts of angles. They send a plane up, you photograph it, and they just try and make it look as convincing as it can. They get incredibly good at it. Here's another one. You've got a dummy gun here, which again, it doesn't look like much up close, but if you're photographing that from 10,000 feet, that will look pretty convincing. And the person that this is all associated with in the public mind is this chap, Jasper Maskelyne. And some of you may have heard of Jasper Maskelyne because after the Maskelyne family are Britain's most famous magicians at this time. I mean, magic has slightly gone out of favor, and Jasper isn't possibly quite the showman that his father and grandfather were. But he writes a book after the war called Magic Top Secret, which is then sort of rewritten in the early 80s into a book called The War Magician. I will say now, Dudley Clark was never allowed to write his deception memoirs because it was all an official secret. Nobody tries to stop Jasper Maskelyne writing his book because it's all made up. And you can't ban somebody from making up stories. But Jasper Maskelyne's stories have been incredibly persistent. If anyone here has heard, I was doing a talk yesterday and somebody said, what about building a fake Alexandria or making the Suez Canal disappear? And it's like, really sorry, Jasper just made those up. But Jasper did make one real contribution to military deception. And in the way of things, he never knew about it. So when he arrives in the camouflage unit, he is given a drawing and they said, can you make something that makes tank look like a truck. And he said that was something that masculines knew how to do. They knew how to make things look like other things. And so he designed what he called the sun shield. And you can see it here, and you can see it being assembled. And there you are. Again, not convincing up close, but convincing at a distance. And masculine has moved off the camouflage unit before these are used, but this is how the Allies pulled off the El Alamein deception. Thousands of these sun shields are assembled to look like trucks in the desert, and they're just left there resting on barrels. And they're left there for weeks so that the German intelligence people get bored of seeing them. They're not doing anything, they never move, and they're just trucks. And then in the week before the attack, each night, a tank unit is driven up, and each tank commander has been told which pitch he's going to. He's been told where his cover is, and they drive up and they take the cover off the barrels and they assemble it over their own tank. And the Royal Engineers go behind them, sweeping up the tank tracks rather. And in the morning, when the sun comes up and the Luftwaffe go up to have another look, it looks like nothing has changed. And each night, the tanks are being moved forward, and behind them, where they were, dummy tanks are being put up so that it looks like nothing is changing, but things are changing under cover. You might have heard of Operation Mincemeat, which is the corpse floated for the Germans to find that's carrying letters that suggest that the I'm going to draw again. Take my life in my hands. Which suggest that the attack will be here in Sardinia, and here in Greece. Now, this is a story that has been written by Dudley Clark. Clark has written that the 1943 Mediterranean story is the Allies are going to have simultaneous attacks at both ends of the Mediterranean. Now, the first thing is that story, in fact, sorry, the real story is that they are going to go to Sicily, which is the obvious target. Everybody agrees it's the obvious target. It's the closest bit of Italy that you can get to, and from Sicily you can just hop over to Italy and then you're on your way, is the idea. That if the Germans had in 1943 had an accurate assessment of the size of the Allied forces, they would have known that the Allies simply did not have enough troops, they didn't have enough ships to launch two attacks in the Mediterranean. But by this stage, because Clark has spent a year with Operation Cascade, just building up and building up and building up the size of the Allied army in the enemy mind, it's plausible. Now, the bit of this story that everybody remembers is mincemeat, because mincemeat is it's just such a vivid story. But actually, mincemeat does not work without Operation Cascade. You might have heard, hang on, of Operation Fortitude, the plan to tell the Nazis that the Allies were going to invade France at Calais rather than Normandy. And indeed, that when the Normandy landing happens, that's not the real attack, that the real attack is going to be in Calais, so that they need to keep troops in Calais. Now, again, this does not work if the Germans know the Allied full strength, because by July the 7th, July the 8th, the Germans can tell you pretty much how many Allied troops there are in Normandy because they can see them, because they're fighting them. And if they had had an accurate troop estimate for how many troops the Allies had, they would have said, well, we know where they're attacking because we can see them all. But what I'm showing you here, sorry, this map is a German intelligence map of where they think the Allied troops are in 1944. And I'm sorry, it's not a great photo, but you can see that not only are there these troops here, which are the troops that will end up in Normandy, the Germans have also got all of these troops here, which they think are ready for Calais. And the thing about those troops is they don't exist. They only exist in German intelligence estimates. Um, More than that, there are VE Day, the moment of the German surrender. There are 300,000 German soldiers in Norway, which is 200,000 more than they thought they needed, as it were, to garrison Norway. And the reason that those troops are all there is because they believe they are waiting to fight off this Allied army that is sitting in Scotland, which again doesn't exist. Um, Now, the interesting thing to me about those soldiers is that it probably doesn't much change the course of the war that 200,000 German soldiers sit in Norway rather than being deployed to the Rhine. It would have slowed the Allied advance. Um, you know, perhaps it changes perhaps the Soviets get further in the meantime. But I'll tell you whose lives were changed by being those German boys being deployed in Norway rather than the Rhine. Those German soldiers. They don't get killed. And what's more, there's a whole load of Allied soldiers who don't get killed killing those German boys. So absolutely, there are German people alive today whose grandfathers owe their survival of the war to Dudley Clarke's creation of a fictitious army in Scotland. And Clarke knew this, and he was incredibly proud of it. He said, not only have we built, he said, we built this weapon, this amazing weapon, but we've built a life-saving weapon, and we've built a weapon that saves the enemy's lives. Because every one of these armies that is deployed to some country that we're not going to go to is an army that we don't have to fight and kill. And that was one of his proudest things. Um, I'm going to finish. We've got lots of time for questions, but I'm going to finish with Dudley Clarke's lessons, because I think you'll find these interesting. His first lesson was understand your enemy. Know what your enemy is afraid of and know what he hopes for, because those are the stories that you can sell him. The second and the big one, and this is the one that people really struggled with, is it doesn't matter what you want the enemy to think, it matters what you want him to do. Because ultimately what he does matters. And very often Clarke would go to one of his generals and he'd say, well, okay, let's think about the next deception plan. And the general would say, well, what I'd like Rommel to think this. And Clarke would say, it doesn't matter what Rommel thinks. In a way, it doesn't actually matter whether he believes our deception plan, just whether he thinks it's credible enough that it has to be worried about. To give you an example, I'm going to be locking my back door tonight. Now, that's not because I believe I'm going to have burglars, but I am worried enough that I might have burglars that it would make sense to lock my back door. And there are lots of sort of plausible threats that you can create that are plausible enough that the enemy has to do something about it. And the final thing Clarke said was, you've got to, you're not trying to sell him facts, you're trying to sell him a story. People want to believe stories. Stories are incredibly powerful, and they just sort of take this grip on our minds. And the best kind of story, he said, is the story he tells himself. So the reason Clarke was ambivalent about mincemeat because although he loved it because it was a great story that he could tell people. But his method of deception was to just pass small puzzle pieces over to the enemy and let the enemy intelligence officer assemble those puzzle pieces and let the enemy intelligence officer think that he had done it himself. And the problem with mincemeat, he said slightly, is it's a bit like sort of passing the enemy the puzzle lid and saying that this is the picture. And the problem with that is that because it involved this corpse carrying these letters that would obviously turn out to be fake, it alerted the Germans to the fact that the Allies were practicing deception. And Clarke said after mincemeat, they were always operating in an atmosphere of suspicion. But he loved it. So, so let your enemy tell himself a story. And those are my lessons. And thank you very much for listening. This is actually a picture of the British book, I realize. I'm going to stop sharing and wave the American and Canadian book at you. Right. This is the book you want to be going out and buying. Um, uh, Hi there. Right.
Uh,
Have we got some questions?
well, we do have some questions. Let me just open up the Q&A box. We've got somebody here who has a background in understanding the war, so that's interesting.
Yeah. Okay.
And meanwhile, we've got somebody raising clap, 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 clap,
That's
clap
nice.
for thank you. Okay, Timothy Bentley. Now, Timothy is in California near Disneyland, so he's joining us from out there.
A
And
world of imagination.
that's right. Now, um, his question is in bits, but you'll understand it.
Yeah.
6th Parachute Division, there weren't 5 corpses off Spain. Mincemeat, this is before you really raised
Right.
mincemeat.
So I let so oh gosh, parachute divisions. I'm terrible. I always talk about the 10th Armored, and I can never remember. I'm terrible at which divisions were fake and which weren't. Um, they definitely created entire fake uh divisions. I might even have it in this book. Uh, do I have handy? So they created an entire fake fleet. Um, uh, no, I can't find it now. Um, I somewhere towards the end of the book, I sort of tried to enumerate all of the many, many, many deceptions they pulled off. There was, I think, the trouble is a lot of these stories get told and then you can't trace them, and I in the end I didn't go into all of them. There is certainly there are stories of German generals being interrogated at the end of the war, and all of these interrogations are quite friendly because the Germans are trying to understand what happened. And there are certainly incidents of them saying, "We never understood why you didn't use that army that was outside Cairo, because we were waiting. You know, we knew that at this moment things were a bit tight for you, and we were sort of waiting for you to throw." These 100,000 men into the fight, and they never appeared. And the reason for that would always be, well, yes, those men didn't exist. I think I heard a story, and I'm going to repeat it, but I'm not going to swear that it's true, that the British airborne divisions only had odd numbers, and the idea was that the Germans would assume that there were even numbered airborne divisions that they weren't seeing. But I that may be an urban myth. There are so many urban myths around deception, but certainly there were lots of times. I can see that Tim's also asked about the U.S. Civil War. Yes, so Quaker guns in the U.S. Civil War are a classic example. These are logs painted black to look like guns. There are some great deception stories from the U.S. Civil War. There's a I can't remember if it's a Northern general or a Southern general who marches sort of the same men round and round and round again in front of his enemy to make himself look stronger than he is. There are, as I say, you know, there's Washington before or after he crosses the Delaware. The Revolution's not my thing. There's a point where Washington is encamped and he spreads his men out and tells them basically to billet themselves in lots and lots of towns so that British spies will think, blimey, they're everywhere. You know, it's lots of stuff to make yourself look stronger than you are. So absolutely. There are we've done. I think I've dealt with mincemeat at length. Shall I just do the questions? Did Dudley come up with the idea of plywood air force to confuse the Germans? Did I don't know. I don't think he came up with the idea. Lots of people thought about dummies. There's sort of an obvious thing to think about, but there is a Dudley Clark story. There's his unique contribution to this is that at one stage, I think in about 43, one of his officers comes to him and says, "We've intercepted this German communication, and we've realised that they can spot the which of our planes are fake, because the fake planes don't have enough internal strength, so they've got props underneath the wings to hold the wings up, and the Germans have started looking for the shadows of those props." And Clark said, "Well, you know what to do." And he said, "What?" He said, "Well, put props under the wings of the real ones as well." So that they think that they're fake. You know, make yourself look strong when you're weak. Make yourself look weak when you're strong. Um, uh, I've dealt with just Jasper Masculine. Um, uh, oh, right. So yes, who are the army? The army in. If I'm just going to put my screen back up for a second, if I can. Um, And I'm going to go back. All right, sorry, click share. Um, Sorry, I don't want to patronize people's knowledge of British geography, but um, uh, the round here is what we call Kent. That's in fact where I live. And this is where the first United States Army Group is, which is an entirely fake unit. And it is indeed, yes, commanded by General Patton, because Patton is in disgrace at this point because of the soldier slapping incident in Sicily. And so the job he is given is to drive round Kent, being noisy and visible and broadcasting. Um, and uh, and again, this sort of goes to the thing about playing to what your enemy thinks. Um, because Hitler thinks that Patton is the Allies' best general. So Hitler quite reasonably thinks he will be the one who is in charge of the invasion. So it's not difficult to sell Hitler the story that the first United States Army Group, commanded by Patton, is going to be the real invasion force because he's ready to believe it. Um, have you got any other questions?
Alex Monroe has just put in a question.
Right.
Was
Oh
no,
gosh, I don't know about Castro.
Let me read it out for the recording. So, was it Castro's famous video interview in which he marched a few hundred men in a wide circle to appear as if he had thousands?
That does ring a bell. I mean, lots of people do this. It's the Battle of Hastings. I mean, I said, that deception is sort of is viewed sniffily. The story goes that the way that the Norman invaders can't break through the King Harold's shield wall. Um, and so what they do is they pretend to flee because they know that then the Saxon army will charge after them, thus breaking their own shield wall. So they pretend to flee and then they turn around and attack when the shield wall has broken itself. Yeah, no, there are it is not hard to find examples of deception in every era, but in a sense, what Clark did that was different was it wasn't possible before 1940 because you hadn't had a situation where the whole world was at war before 1940, and so suddenly you have to, if you're the Germans, is the Allied attack going to come through Greece? Well, how worried do we need to be about Greece? Well, we need to put some troops there. Inevitably you're going to end up putting troops somewhere where they're not going to be needed, and you've got to defend everywhere. And one of the things that Clark understood was we'll work out where he thinks he's the most vulnerable, and why they did this Scottish Army Norway thing was because the deceivers in London who were working sort of with Clark under his training, they basically sort of start putting out deception stories here and there, and they discover that there is no story about an attack on Norway that the Germans won't believe because Hitler is obsessed with Norway. He calls it his zone of destiny. So he's absolutely certain that the Allies are going to attack Norway. Now, the British have attacked Norway to try to defend Norway in 1940. It's an absolute disaster. No one in Britain is ever going back to Norway again. No, that's just all I know. It's cold. It's not on the way to anywhere. And last time we went, it was awful. We're not going back. But because Hitler believes it, you can just keep selling this story. So that's what I meant about understanding your enemy and playing on his fears or his hopes. That's when the Allied when the Royal Navy fleet sails. Oh, can't remember the year to sink. There's a German pocket battleship called the Scharnhorst, which is sheltering in Norway, and the Navy decides it's had enough. It's going to go and sink it. And when the fleet sails to sink the Scharnhorst, and the fleet is spotted, the first thing the Germans think is they're invading. This is it. They're coming. And the reason that for years everyone has looked at this and go, why on earth would they think that? And well, it's because Dudley Clark's deceivers had been telling them for years that that this was going to happen, so they're looking for it. So that's where their minds go.
Have any deception attempts ever backfired enormously?
Oh gosh, yes. Now, well, I'm going to break some hearts here. The Ghost Army, which is very famous among Americans, which is this sort of um uh it's slightly after the period of my book, so I don't really go into it, but the best study of Allied deception concluded that the Ghost Army, which is operating in Northern Europe after D-Day, that during the Battle of the Bulge, the main achievement of the Ghost Army was to get in the way of Patton trying to move north. Um, I mean, that's not strictly deception backfiring, but well, actually, I'll give you a really up to date one. Um, when Putin is preparing to invade Ukraine, um, I mean, it's interesting the extent to which his deception works because Britain and America's intelligence services were absolutely clear that Putin was going to invade Ukraine and roughly how he was going to do it. But they struggle to convince the Ukrainians of this, and the other people who don't believe it's actually going to happen turn out to have been the Russian army. And so the Russian army, when it finds that it has orders to invade Ukraine, is not ready to do it. The soldiers aren't sort of mentally ready. They don't have the equipment. They don't have the supplies. And so what looks like this tremendously impressive army going in is actually an army that is taking itself by surprise. And yes, so that was the deception worked in the sense that the Ukrainians weren't ready, but it also didn't work in the sense that the Russians weren't ready, which is partly why it went wrong. And the interesting thing about actually, I mean, while I'm on Ukraine, one of the funny things about deception is that after every war, the generals say, "Well, yes, that worked tremendously well, but it'll never work again." So, sort of after the first, there were deception efforts in the First World War, and Wavell's involved in one of them. And the generals say, well, that worked fine, but it won't work now because, the enemy's got fast planes and, good cameras with really good lenses. So, uh, we won't be able to fool him again. And actually, Clark's deception, the deception ahead of El Alamein, relies on the Luftwaffe having planes that can go up and photograph all of this stuff that's being done to impress them behind the lines. There's no point in doing it if they can't see it. So what happens is that the deceivers adapt. And again, to go to Ukraine, where, well, look, deception won't work now because the enemy's got satellites. I mean, how many satellites with amazing lenses are currently pointed down at Ukraine? Lots and lots, right? No point in doing deception. The first thing is the Ukrainians are building dummy guns. I've seen news reports of them. They're building dummy guns because they might not look good up close, but from space they look convincing. But my favorite Ukrainian deception story is that uh, very early in the war, the Russians are trying to knock out the Ukrainian Air Force, and so they go and they bomb all of the hangars that they can see, and yet, and their satellites confirm that all the Ukrainian air bases are destroyed, and yet their pilots keep meeting Ukrainian pilots in the air, and Russian intelligence is baffled by this. And what the Ukrainians have done is I guess they've sent up drones. They've taken really high definition photographs of a bombed hangar from above, and then they've printed it out on huge sheets and they've pasted it over the top of intact hangars so that from space, and again, there's no point in doing this if the enemy doesn't have satellites, from space, those hangars and those runways look like they've been destroyed. And at the one point, there's an intercepted Russian sort of intelligence question: is could the Ukrainians have underground runways? Now, you know, that's not that's not how flying works. But they're totally baffled. So it's a constant back and forth. The technology advances and the deceivers advance what they're doing to match it.
That's an incredible story. I love that one. Thank you. So I'm wondering, you have had and you still have an amazing career doing political coverage and reporting on what's going on with the prime ministers in London. And at what point did something happen where you decided, oh, okay, I'd like to write a book about these
Okay, so
espionage attempts?
it was actually reaches around behind him. Um, so in about 2014, yeah, it must have been 2014. I went down because my part of my job used to be go down to the National Archives when they were releasing sort of more historical documents, and and I went to the release of a set of documents from MI5, Britain's internal security agency, about a wartime operation to trap British fascists, to identify and trap British fascists, and which all centered around one extraordinary man called Eric Roberts, um, who there were mysterious things about him that didn't make sense or that sort of left more questions than answers. And I was absolutely gripped by his story. I just thought it was amazing, and so I ended up writing Agent Jack, which is the true story of MI5's secret Nazi hunter, of particular interest to Canadians because after the war he retires to Canada and ends his days on Salt Spring Island, um, and his family live in Toronto and on Vancouver Island. Um, so um, Yes, so that sort of, and I enjoyed writing that so much that I sort of thought I'd like to keep doing it. So that's really it.
Fascinating. Are you working on anything else that's going to be coming out?
Not for a little bit. I am working on something, but not. It's not at a point of discussion yet.
Ah, okay. Well, we'll watch for it. Oh, something else has come in here. Just a moment. Timothy in California. Talking about the National Archives. I'm wondering why they're still keeping the information about Rudolf Hess secret.
Oh gosh. Well, there are. I don't know. I've not done Hess in any detail, so I don't know. This is for people who don't know. There is this ongoing mystery about Rudolf Hess, who was sort of Hitler's deputy, who 41, gets on a plane, flies over to Scotland, parachutes out, and is immediately arrested. And is trying to. It says, I think, that he wants to conduct peace negotiations. Um, and nobody's ever quite got. Had he lost his mind? Why did he? Was he there with authorization? Why did he think this would work? Um, Uh, I don't know that we haven't released it. I mean, MI5 releases what it wants to release, and sometimes it's. I mean, when I was doing Agent Jack, they said, well, to be honest, we destroyed a lot of the records after the war because we didn't think we need them. Some organizations, a special operations executive, destroyed a lot of their paperwork after the war because they were worried that people essentially they had been doing what might now be called terrorism, and and sort of, and well, all's fair in war, but they weren't certain that everyone would see it that way. So they really frustratingly, the SOE destroyed an awful lot of their files. So I don't know. It may be that the files have been destroyed. I mean, I haven't done Hess in any detail, so I don't exactly know what Timothy's referring to there.
Okay.
But I mean, the answer is that sometimes stuff is kept secret for incompetence, and sometimes it's kept secret because they're embarrassed about it. I mean, I don't. I think, in fact, I'm fairly confident that with Agent Jack, they they didn't understand what they were releasing when they released it, if you see what I mean. I think they thought it was quite a small operation. And it was only when I started pulling on the thread that I was like, blimey, and in fact, you have these odd sort of things where you can't exactly talk to MI5, but I did start to get the impression that they were slightly surprised by the extent of it all.
I understand what you mean about pulling at threads. It makes me think of when I was writing up my dissertation,
Mm.
and I had these publications that I wanted to quote as my sources, and I'd go through them, and then there would be something else there that I just couldn't let go, and it would mention something else, and I'd be off there, and then I'd be off here, I'd be off there, and then I had to put the whole thing together, and it was quite an adventure. So yes, so let me see. I think that's it for the questions. So Rob, this has been really fascinating
Good.
and full of gripping stories. I have been reading The Illusionist myself, and I can assure the audience that there are lots more stories in there, lots more intrigue, lots more problem solving. There's no gore, sorry. So it's all about strategy. So, if you want to find it somewhere and read it, you will really enjoy it. And I'm meaning to get Agent Jack at some point too. And I can see there's lots of people raising their
Yes.
claps.
Please buy my book. Support a struggling author today. Um,
So, so, Rob, you've been also very generous with your time and your explanations.
no,
And
it was a pleasure.
on behalf of Toronto Mensa, please accept our thanks for your wonderful talk. And as a sign of our appreciation, we will be sending you a small gift,
Oh, thank you.
so you can watch for that. And I also want to thank the audience for your questions and for your participation. And it's been really great. So we're done.
Well, thank you very much.
So thank you. Thanks very much. We'll end now. Bye, everyone.